neither deforestation nor timber trafficking. Beside me is a perfectly legal operation that even most environmentalists would applaud. This week's show has brought me to the heart of the forest in Burgundy for a look at the role wood, of all things, can play as a high-tech, cutting-edge, carbon-neutral alternative to fossil fuels. Coming up in this week's show, a renewable source of energy that gets no respect. We look at why wood-burning stoves are hot property here in France. Next, we head to the forests of Montana, where a pesky beetle is behind the demise of huge expanses of trees. Once controlled by cold winters, a warmer climate is allowing the killer insect to thrive. And finally, forest cleansing in South Africa. Authorities in Cape Town have embarked on a program to eliminate foreign water-greedy trees in favour of native species. Here we're looking at recently cut oak trees, part of a sustainably managed forest here in the centre of France. All of the wood here is bound to be burned in homes as a source of heat. While burning wood is nothing new, the arrival of new, modern, high-efficiency stoves is making it increasingly acceptable to do so. In the Auger family home, there's an obvious best seat in the house. Tucked in the corner, their wood oven stove. Here there's not one, but two to help heat a 700 square metre space.
When I'm outside, I get cold hands, so I come inside and warm them up in front of the stove. It's good.
3 years ago, Pascal began to search for a more efficient and ecological way to heat her property.
It complements our heating with oil. We can't only use the wood stove, but between seasons, in autumn and in spring, we only use the wood stove and maybe the other heating for the bedrooms, but that's all. It avoids using fossil fuels, that's for sure. The wood stove is becoming the principal source of heating, the main way that we stay warm.
Voilà, les petits popcorn.
It's also less expensive. Wood is up to 1/5 cheaper than using fossil fuels like oil or gas.
The heat spreads around the room and it works well because it circulates.
There are rectangular ones, round ones, ones with windows on the side.
Wood oven stoves are certainly in fashion. 250,000 sold in France in 2009, up more than 300% in the last decade. They come with a cost of between 500 and 4,000 euros, plus installation.
Today, a wood-burning stove has 85% efficiency, with 15% of energy loss. By comparison, an open fireplace is exactly the same percentage in reverse. A stove can heat 100 square meters in a well-isolated home. A fireplace can heat 5 or 10 square meters immediately in front.
Using wood is not necessarily bad for the environment. When alive, trees absorb carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, which has a positive effect. Once chopped and burned, they release the same amount of CO2 back into the atmosphere, making it a carbon-neutral fuel.
Obviously, we don't have enough wood to replace petrol or electricity, that's clear. But we have the opportunity to use wood on a larger scale. We could double or triple the use of wood energy. And that is what is being forecasted.
Burgundy's timber sector has welcomed government incentives to increase the use of wood as a renewable fuel. And for the most part, they've worked.
We've had a lot of demand in the last few years, and we tried to use the most high-tech equipment, but unfortunately the temperature this year has been very bad for us. It's just not cold enough.
A warm winter means less need for heat, and fashionable or not, the firewood industry is dependent on a factor that remains out of its control. Around the world, the timber industry employs more than 10 million people. But in the US, the sector is facing a crisis without precedent. A tiny beetle is ravaging tracts of forest at a staggering rate, and scientists are blaming a warmer climate for the insect's proliferation. This next report from one of the most at-risk forests in Montana in the United States.
The state of Montana is well known for its breathtaking landscapes, but for 10 years, huge swathes of its pine forests have been dying off at an incredible rate. trees have died in their millions. Entomologist Diana Six looked into the epidemic and found the culprit, the pine beetle.
One parental pair of these beetles can often lay 50 to 200 eggs. So you get a really big increase in numbers.
Burrowing into the bark to lay eggs, the insects cut off vital nutrients, killing a tree in barely 2 years. But the problem goes beyond just the loss of the trees themselves to a looming nightmare for the local ecosystem.
And so when you start losing your trees, the snow melts off a lot sooner, and then you don't have water for the rest of the year. So right now we're seeing earlier kind of flooding as we lose all our water at once. And then in our rivers, the flows get really low in the end of summer, the water gets hot, and the trout die, and there's just not enough water to go around.
Back at the lab, Diane's experiments led her to blame one principal cause behind the beetle's rapid spread: global warming. Rising temperatures can speed up the beetle's reproductive cycle and means a lack of the cold that usually kills them.
Now that it's warm enough, the beetle has moved upslope all the way to the tops of the mountains, and it's caused so much mortality in the last few years that we think we're actually going to lose this entire ecosystem.
In the short term, there's little to be done to stop the epidemic, except clear-cut the affected areas. However, in just 5 years, more than 17,000 square kilometers have been lost, directly affecting one of Montana's main resources and the workforce needed to manage it.
Well, we never anticipated anything like this happening with our timber supply. I would consider this bug epidemic somewhat catastrophic. We're in a situation where we're going to either have to find some other kind of a business to deal with the dead trees, or possibly go a further distance, which may make it economically not feasible.
Montana sees thousands of trees replanted every year, but with the pine beetle spreading so fast, it's just not enough to keep up.
Climate change is also a consideration in these forests, largely because the local native oak trees require lots of water, not always available in a drier climate. Today I'm joined by Christelle Rousselet, a forest expert in the region. Thanks for joining us. Can you tell me, is climate change a problem that you need to consider today?
Yes, we really need to think about it nowadays. We're going to cut down the trees in 150 years, and so they're going to have to tolerate a change in the climate.
And what kind of things can you do?
We can choose species of oak that need less water, species that will be able to survive in the decades to come.
In South Africa, the problem is somewhat different because it's the non-native trees which are guzzling all the water. Foreign trees are now being treated as invaders under a large-scale eradication program. This next report from Frans van Kat's correspondence in Cape Town.
They call them the death squads. Wielding chainsaws, they systematically destroy anything foreign. Trees from Australia, Europe or Asia are eliminated. Patrols have spotted a eucalyptus. No quarter is given. The foreigner must die.
These trees are actually harmful to our area because of the amount of water that they drink. We have to get rid of the alien vegetation trees and get the indigenous trees back that are not drinking our water, because South Africa is a water scarce country and we need to actually try and protect our natural resource.
This is not a new project. It was begun by South Africa's Environment Ministry back in 1996, and it gets stronger every year. Manfred has worked here since the beginning. He says that a weeping willow or a full-grown eucalyptus gulps up 300 litres of water a day, 10 times more than a local almond tree. In the Western Cape, more than 500 people do this job every day. They don't only destroy trees, they lay poison to make sure nothing grows back. Meticulous work for the death squads, and risky too.
It's very labor intensive, so there's a lot of risks and hazards. People can get injured easily because it's in nature, there's snakes, there's bad underfoot conditions, and we do pick up injuries on that.
Sometimes, to speed things up, the death squads use fires, and the indigenous vegetation grows back in a matter of months. To improve the underground water level, all the pines around this dam were cut down. In South Africa, plantations of non-indigenous trees are subject to a special tax. Local people are kept informed.
We've come a long way in creating awareness amongst the public on the eradication of alien vegetation. We've also gone so far within communities to also actually persuade them not to plant alien trees, but to rather plant indigenous trees.
Nearly 750,000 acres have been cleared in the last 3 years, but the war against foreign plant life is far from over. To ensure that the only trees in South Africa are indigenous, 10% of the country will have to be cleaned up.
And that's all we have time for this week on Environment. I can tell you it's still cold enough here in Burgundy to use plenty of this wood. Thanks for joining us this week, and I look forward to seeing you next time.